The scene opens in a city where rain pours down. Inside a room, the protagonist, a boy named Joon, is engrossed in a video game on his PC when he suddenly encounters a terrifying character and dies in the game. Just then, the door swings open and he feels the presence of a strange creature in the room. Startled, he lets out a loud scream, and the lights flicker on, revealing his parents. He quickly expresses that they frightened him, to which his mother responds with a gentle pat, telling him that he scared them even more. She reminds him that the enrollment ceremony is the next day, but Joon continues to play his games, undeterred. As she continues to pat him, he winces in discomfort and complains that it hurts. He adds that he didn't want to participate in the enrollment ceremony and asks his father for help. However, his father insists he will always side with his mother. Joon is taken aback, and in a surprising twist, his mother playfully smacks him with a scary smile. The following day, as students arrive at school, Joon checks his phone and makes his way to class, wondering about the temporary arrangement for first-year students in Class 3. Once inside, he finds many students already seated. The realization hits him that he will be spending the next year with them, and a wave of nervousness washes over him. He decided to play games for a while until the enrollment ceremony began. Suddenly, a virtual screen appeared in front of him, displaying information about Nakseong Highschool. The message informed him that he would have to battle ghosts and mentioned something about a demon king. Confused, he wondered what it all meant, and if his mother was right about him playing too many games, perhaps he was starting to have hallucinations. Looking around, he realized that no one else seemed to care about the screen. Was he the only one who could see it? Just then, the broadcaster announced a power outage at the school, explaining that they were unable to broadcast on TV. Consequently, the enrollment ceremony would be held in the courtyard, and new students were asked to gather there. As he left the classroom, one boy mused about why the ceremony was taking place in the courtyard. Another boy, dressed in new clothes, suggested they should play hooky. The first boy scoffed, questioning who would skip out on the enrollment ceremony, and urged them to go see what was happening. Joon followed the throng of students, the virtual screen still hovering in front of him. He felt that this wasn't a simple glitch. He couldn't figure out how to close it, and wondered what he should do next. As they all arrived in the courtyard, he noted that the screen resembled a system window and wondered if he could turn it off. The headmaster stepped onto the stage, addressing all the students as his beloved kin, expressing his pleasure at meeting them. Just then, Joon was shocked to see the hologram vanish. The headmaster welcomed the newly enrolled students and introduced himself. Suddenly, a loud explosion erupted above him, killing the headmaster and several others on stage. Panic swept through the crowd as students screamed in terror. Other teachers attempted to calm everyone down, but Joon quickly pulled out his phone to call for help. Before he could relay any information, another explosion struck, claiming his life as well. Stunned, Joon wondered what was happening and thought it was time to escape from the school. Students were rushing toward the gate, but they discovered it was locked. The watchman was dozing off at the time, but he awoke to the sound of commotion. He approached, asking what was happening during the enrollment ceremony. Upon seeing students climbing the gate, he questioned why they were doing such a thing. One boy shouted that they needed to escape, or they would die. The watchman demanded to know what they were talking about and instructed them to get down. The students pleaded with him to give them the keys to open the gate, insisting they needed to leave. As they urged him to hurry, the watchman retorted that they could all collectively lose their minds and let him go. In response, one boy yelled for them to rummage through the guard's belongings for the keys. Frustrated, the students turned their anger toward the guard, demanding the keys to the gate. Joon had already climbed onto the gate when he heard another explosion nearby, causing him to panic. He realized he could die if he lagged behind. Determined not to perish there, he jumped outside, feeling a rush of relief as he escaped the school. However, his vision suddenly distorted. The screen flashed, indicating he would start from the checkpoint once more. Terrified, he awoke in his room, realizing he had experienced the same dream again. He hadn't seen this particular nightmare in a while, likely because the next day was graduation day. He remembered the bizarre incident he experienced 3 years ago during the enrollment ceremony, which had come to be known as the Nakseong High 300-joint explosion incident. He had barely managed to escape after witnessing his head explode 3 times, only to find himself back at the start of the enrollment ceremony. Now, 3 years later, he couldn't distinguish whether those events were real or merely a dream. What he was certain of, however, was that the memory of that horrific incident and the game's status window had haunted him for 3 long years. He recalled that when he finally managed to escape, he had desperately asked for help, pleading with those nearby to call the police. They questioned if he was okay, but he felt too weak to respond and could only cry out in pain. When he awoke, he found himself lying in a hospital bed, his parents by his side. They anxiously asked if he was all right and if he had been hurt. Overcome with emotion, he hugged them tightly, tears streaming down his face. As he calmed down, he turned on the TV and watched the news. A female reporter announced that on the 4th day, at around 9:30 a.m., a tragic incident had occurred at Nakseong Highschool in the Gwanak district of Seoul, where approximately 300 staff members and students had lost their lives. The heads of all the bodies were extremely disfigured, and the mysterious incident was currently under investigation by the police. Joon recalled that only he and a few other students had managed to survive. Speculations about a chemical leak or a virus had been dismissed by the authorities. He tried to push those memories aside, reminding himself that his family had moved to a new house and he had attended a different high school for the past 3 years. Just then, the screen reappeared and he wondered what in the world that system window could be. Suddenly, his phone rang. Checking the screen, he saw it was an emergency alert instructing people to gather their emergency supplies. Just as he heard a loud rumbling sound, he came rushing to his parents, who were anxiously asking Joon what was happening. He replied that he had no idea as he had just woken up. When his mother looked out the window, she urged her husband to take a look as well. They all stared in shock at a massive black creature lumbering through the city. Joon rushed to the balcony, realizing that it was headed in the direction of Nakseong Highschool. The screen flashed a message indicating that it was graduation day and that the Demon King had revived. Joon was in shock and lost his balance, nearly falling from his balcony. As he completed 2 tasks, he felt a strange sensation of regression. He screamed, and when he opened his eyes, he found himself back in the classroom on the day he had first seen the hologram 3 years ago. As he glanced around, he noticed the students were all dressed in their Nakseong High School uniforms. The broadcaster announced that there was a power outage at the school, which had prevented them from broadcasting on TV. The enrollment ceremony would now take place in the courtyard, and new students were instructed to gather there. Joon couldn't help but wonder if he had truly gone back 3 years in time. As the broadcaster repeated his words, Joon thought about the incident he wanted to forget for the rest of his life. It was the same day in the same place as 3 years ago where he was waiting for the entrance ceremony. He remembered falling off the railing and smashing his head against the pavement. But why was he back at Nakseong High School? He wondered if this regression was a continuation of the nightmare he had experienced. Just then, a lady entered the classroom and asked a few students why they weren't heading to the ceremony. Joon reflected on how, throughout his 3 years of high school, he had been tormented by nightmares of the bizarre status window and the Nakseong High School incident. Surely this had to be a nightmare born from his trauma. The lady urged them to hurry and gently nudged a girl who was sleeping. A nearby boy and girl glanced at the slumbering girl but didn't make an effort to wake her. Joon noted the intimidation that surrounded her. It was no joke. He could almost smell the cigarettes if he got too close. He realized he would need to put on some kind of act to escape this nightmare. Joon approached the sleeping girl and decided to wake her up. The other 2 students looked on with concern. As he neared her, he thought about his experiences over the past 3 years. Waking up a delinquent girl in her first year within this dream felt trivial in comparison. He opened his mouth to speak, but a strange voice emerged, causing him to wonder if something was stuck in his throat. Embarrassment washed over him as the other 2 students watched. Joon quickly made an excuse, telling the girl that the teacher had asked everyone to come outside now. She merely glared at him, and he felt a shiver run down his spine at her fierce expression. Just then, he noticed the teacher standing at the gate, and relief washed over him. He had survived. As the girl left her seat, she muttered, "This is so annoying." Joon thought about how he could have been beaten up right then and there. The other 2 students began to exit the classroom as well. As they all left, Joon couldn't shake the feeling that he had experienced a moment like this before during the entrance ceremony at this high school. He recalled the gruesome memory of the ceremony where several hundred heads would explode, and even if this was just a nightmare, he felt no confidence in facing such a horrific scene again. He didn't think about moving to another place to avoid attending the ceremony. Instead, he considered staying hidden in some obscure corner, hoping to change the course of events. He called out to the teacher and explained that he had suffered from anemia since he was young. If he stood for too long or stayed out in the sun, he would collapse. The teacher replied that he didn't really seem to be suffering from anemia. He countered, saying that anemia came with many stereotypes, but in reality, it had little to do with weight. What if it really is that bad, he pondered. Did she really think he wouldn't make it through the entrance ceremony? She seemed to understand, agreeing that the entrance ceremony wasn't all that important. However, she added that on the rare chance he did collapse, his mother would inevitably come running, making a big fuss about it. He thought about how that would complicate things for her as well. The teacher replied that such situations could be a real issue. Parents these days were quite intimidating. If his mother showed up, she would take him to the infirmary to rest while the entrance ceremony continued. He thanked her for her understanding. The teacher then told the other 3 students not to disappear on their way to the ceremony and insisted they must attend. They all nodded in agreement, and Joon locked himself in the infirmary. After some time, he emerged, declaring to himself that he could leave now. He thought about how he hadn't gone out to the schoolyard yet, and he pondered what he should do to change that situation. He needed to find some sort of variable to shift the outcome. As he reflected, memories of his time in the hospital surfaced, particularly the news report he had heard. The reporter had wondered what differences existed between the victims and the survivors of the Nakseong High School incident. It had been revealed that the survivors were also present at the entrance ceremony during the incident, which was quite a mystery in itself. Most of the people who fled the scene quickly had their priorities straight, as escaping as fast as possible seemed crucial. However, there were several individuals who managed to escape and survive the incident, suggesting that it wasn't simply a matter of how quickly one left the scene, there was likely some other variable at play. As Joon walked, he stopped to reflect on the situation. He sensed that, apart from this unidentified variable, he still wasn't getting the right feeling about the events. Upon arriving in the classroom, he noticed that 3 other students were still present. Curious, he asked why they hadn't left. One girl explained that she had been trying to reach the schoolyard, but another girl suddenly returned to the classroom, prompting both of them to come back as well. Joon deduced that they must have followed the delinquent back inside. Among the group, there was a girl who seemed quite nervous and a bespectacled boy. He thought they could potentially help him change the situation. Joon introduced himself as Lee Joon, noting that his name was only a single syllable. The girl identified herself as Joon Suna, while the boy introduced himself as Jongwon. Jongwon then asked Joon if he was feeling okay, implying that he looked a bit pale, and questioned whether it was all right for him to be there. Joon took a seat and assured them that he was fine, adding that being anemic was a lie. He then asked why they hadn't left yet, and were instead just sitting around in the classroom. Suna replied that she was a bit slow to react. Joon noticed the screen indicated that his understanding of her was increasing, and he realized he would be able to see more details once he unlocked the status window. He was shocked and wondered if he had ever seen a system window alert like that before. Jong mentioned that he was reminded of the school announcement ghost story, which is why he hadn't left. Intrigued, Joon asked what type of ghost story it was. He recalled that the words he had seen a couple of times in the status window were related to the ghost story. He then asked Jong to explain it in detail. Jong inquired about which part Joon wanted to hear. Joon replied that he wanted to know more about the ghost story itself. Jong began, explaining that on a certain night, during self-study time, there was a power outage at the school. The students were startled by the sudden darkness, but soon after they heard a broadcast announcement. In the broadcast, the announcer informed students that they would be dismissed early due to the blackout and instructed all students on the scoot in the schoolyard. He repeated the message, emphasizing that all remaining students were to come outside without exception. As a boy was leaving his classroom, he asked a girl sitting nearby if the top-ranked student in the school was also studying during the blackout and why she wasn't coming out. She was trembling, and he noticed that she seemed unaware of the blackout. Confused, he wondered how the announcement could have been broadcast in the dark. Feeling frightened, the boy also began to panic. Joon, sensing the tension, asked if that was all there was to the story. Jong replied that it was just the beginning and asked if it was the first time Joon had heard something like this. Joon denied it, explaining that he had heard a similar story a long time ago. Jong continued, sharing that there were many versions of the tale, and in some, the first and second ranked students looked out the window only to see the schoolyard transformed into a sea of blood. Joon felt a chill run down his spine upon hearing this. Curiously, he asked Jong whether the first and second rank holders had survived and what had ultimately happened to them. Jong replied that it was hard to say, but based on the situation they should be fine. However, he emphasized that it wasn't as if these were real events, it was just a ghost story. Joon then asked if Jong hadn't stayed because of that story. He wondered whether Jong was merely bragging about his knowledge or if he was trying to impress them with his smarts. Gradually, Joon's understanding of Jong increased as well. Jong admitted that the story did bother him a little, but that wasn't the main reason he had chosen to remain behind. He pointed out that during a blackout, they wouldn't be able to use the microphones at the podium, so it would be impossible to proceed with the entire ceremony. He figured they would just send everyone back to their classrooms, which was why he had decided to sit there instead. Joon thought that Jong was simply too lazy to move. Jong continued, explaining that they could use a speaker on a separate power line or some sort of backup generator. Joon recalled the ghost story, which reminded him of the Nakseong Highschool 300 serial head explosion incident, realizing that this tale might be related. Suna interjected, saying that the themes of the story were interesting. Joon noticed that he was suddenly reflecting on the ghost story and found himself continuously staring at her. He then apologized to her, explaining that he hadn't been staring to pressure her into responding. She became shy and agreed. Joon heard the headmaster greeting all the new students at Nakseong Highschool, expressing his pleasure at meeting them. Joon thought that the ceremony was beginning, hoping to avoid a situation where his head might go flying. The headmaster congratulated the students on their acceptance into the main school, and Joon contemplated how this would play out. The headmaster introduced himself, mentioning that Nakseong High School had been established in 1984 and had seen many prominent students graduate over the past 40 years. He emphasized that the school was steeped in deep tradition and rich history, but also aimed to equip students with the correct mindset to succeed in the 21st century global society. Additionally, he hoped they would connect with the ubiquitous networks they would need in the future. Hearing this made Joon happy. He realized he had finally made it through. He also earned 5 ghost story points. As he reflected on his survival, he thought about how he should be waking up from this dream by now, especially with the system messages he had never seen before continuously popping up. In a moment of frustration, he grabbed Gaiyong's collar, asking him to help him escape this dream. Jong was shocked and asked what had brought this on, urging him to stop. Suddenly, the sleeping girl threw an object at Joon, shouting that he was being too loud and telling him to get lost if they were going to fight like that. Joon agreed, recalling the earlier regression window and everything that had happened. Just then, he noticed the screen displaying that he had cleared the quest to make 3 friends at school. After the entrance ceremony ended, the headmaster instructed the students to return to their classes. Joon was able to see his status, but it only displayed limited information about his 3 friends. He realized that these were status windows he hadn't encountered before, and decided to check Suna's first, wondering if he should also click on Jong's. After examining their statuses, he noted that additional information seemed to be added as he got to know them better. He wondered if this would be based on his own knowledge of them. Now that he thought about it, the earlier prompt had asked him to make 3 friends. Next, he looked at the status of the sleeping girl, whose name was Lee Jinhee. Joon found it a rather delinquent-sounding name, but he couldn't help but wonder if she could be counted as one of his friends. It dawned on him that it wasn't enough just to have a friend. He was living in a reality where he had regressed, and the system was functioning in ways he hadn't fully realized. He didn't understand why, but the ghost story seemed to be coming to life. According to the system, a demon king would be revived in 3 years, and he wondered when something so bothersome had happened to him. A teacher entered the classroom, asking the students to pay attention as he walked to the center of the room. His behavior seemed peculiar to Joon, who wondered if he was their homeroom teacher. The teacher, acting strangely, greeted them, expressing his pleasure at meeting them all and urging everyone to get along for the upcoming year. Joon found the homeroom teacher to be quite odd and pondered the thought of spending 3 more years in high school with him. The girl seated ahead of Joon passed him a paper, and he assumed the printouts should be self-explanatory. Suddenly, an announcement came over the loudspeaker from the broadcasting room, stating that they had confirmed errors in the distributed printout regarding school regulations and would be retrieving them. The message was repeated, instructing the homeroom teachers from each class to collect the printouts without missing a single one. Joon wondered if something was written on the paper that warranted such urgency. The teacher, noting that something was incorrectly printed, asked everyone to retrieve their copies. A boy quickly snatched the paper from Joon and handed it to the teacher. Joon thought he could have simply asked Jong or Suna about it. Jayan apologized and mentioned that he hadn't heard the details, thinking the content would be too obvious. Suna noted that she had read it, but since they took it back so quickly, she couldn't remember the specifics. Joon asked if she recalled the content and what the errors everyone had been discussing were. She replied that the printing wasn't the issue, but there were some strange lines. Joon wondered why those lines were considered weird. Suna explained that while the other lines were normal, there was one that warned against meeting a certain woman in the school regulations, likely referring to a woman who laughed. Joon asked if it instructed them to be cautious when encountering a laughing woman at school. Suna apologized, stating there was something about being careful, but she didn't remember that part, and she wondered if it was a prank. Jain suggested it could be a prank, but it seemed like a reference to a ghost story in the manual. Joon recalled the ghost story, which had been mentioned again. Jain explained that it was a ghost story that had recently become popular on the internet, characterized by strange warning messages included in what appeared to be normal printouts. He asked if they hadn't heard of it before, and offered to make it easier by showing them. Then Guy asked them both for their phone numbers so he could send them the link through Kakao Talk. After exchanging numbers, Joon glanced at Suna's happy face and thought that she might be excited about making friends on her first day. Finally, Guyan sent them the link, telling them to give it a read. It was the employment announcement, and he asked if they noticed anything unusual in it. Joon replied that he spotted a few strange lines and inquired about their meaning. He noted that the notice was a bit odd and asked what the conclusion was. Jain explained that it wasn't that he couldn't answer their questions. Rather, ghost stories were not supposed to have conclusions. He mentioned that it was just something uploaded by someone employed at Clover Industries, and it was poorly organized. Joon asked if that was really the case. Jain confirmed that this was why they couldn't seek a conclusion, emphasizing that it wasn't because he lacked knowledge about it. Joon apologized, admitting he didn't know much about such matters, as he had never been interested in them. He thought this issue was bothering him more than it should. Jain explained that the point was not that he felt embarrassed for not knowing the solution, the solution simply didn't exist in that type of ghost story. Joon remarked that a manual ghost story involves the inclusion of strange warning messages in an official document like that. Jain agreed, saying that for novices they were starting to grasp the concept. Joon wondered what he should focus on thinking about right now, recalling the line about being cautious around the laughing woman. As they were leaving the school for the day, he noticed Suna's worried expression and thought about how he was going to walk home alone. However, he decided that he didn't need to treat her coldly. He asked her if they could walk home together and inquired about Gyan's whereabouts. She pointed out Gyan, who was with another boy. As Joon observed Gyan chatting with the other boy, he thought they seemed to be getting along well as fellow nerds. Joon turned to Suna again and suggested they walk together, asking if she lived in the Jungang apartment complex. She confirmed that she did, and then Joon said they should go across the courtyard. As they were walking, Joon mentioned that the homeroom teacher seemed funny and asked what Suna thought. She agreed with him. He sensed that she wasn't very talkative, and wondered if it really mattered. He noticed the watchman shouting at students wandering around in slippers, warning them that they might end up falling. Joon reflected that it had been 3 years since he last saw him. When Joon and Suna reached the school's main gate, they parted ways, and he told her to let's meet the next day. They both exchanged greetings before going their separate ways. As Joon arrived at his building, he realized he needed the passcode to open the gate but couldn't remember it. He thought it was strange that he had returned home but struggled to recall a passcode from 3 years ago. He remembered that in his past life, his family had hurriedly moved out due to an incident, resulting in the high school and its surroundings being completely shut down. He pulled out his phone to call his mother, but just then, a lady exited the building, causing the gate to open. He was grateful to her for that. As he entered, he noticed that the gum stuck to the railing was still the same, and he wondered if his home had remained unchanged as well. As he entered his house, he remarked that he was back, but when he received no response from his mother, he wondered if she had gone out. Then he remembered that this was around the time when his mother worked as a cashier at a local mart. He found a note written by her suggesting he order some chicken if he got hungry. This made him emotional, as he felt that ordering chicken wasn't enough. He was already full. Deciding to change his clothes and lie down, he reflected on how he had managed to eat his fill, thanks to the emergency fund being in the same spot. As he relaxed, he reminded himself that he had really returned 3 years into the past and had come back from school early. It was still his old home, but he felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him. He was resting, he heard a sound someone was unlocking the door to his house. Realizing it was his parents, he rushed to welcome them. His mother asked what he was so eager to greet them for that day. He replied that he missed them both. His father jokingly asked if he had seen a ghost at home or something. His mother responded with a laugh, saying he was so funny. Joon felt a wave of relief wash over him. He was glad that his parents were alive and safe. While brushing his teeth, he caught a brief glimpse of his reflection and realized he was a good-looking guy, with a witty and mischievous demeanor. He remembered that he had always been above average in whatever he did, but he never properly finished anything. For some reason, despite feeling lonely when he was alone, he craved solitude in a group setting, leading to a constant inner conflict. Even though he was good at saving money for small things, he also had a tendency to impulse buy anything he desired. He stopped reminiscing and thought that the system was actually good at perceiving those traits, which must be outside the realm of his real-life understanding. Just then, his father knocked on the bathroom door, asking if he was done. Joon ignored him, continuing to glance at his reflection and wondering if there was anything useful he could glean from it. His father shouted that he needed to use the bathroom urgently and asked how much longer Joon would take. Joon continued to ignore him, pondering whether he could return to the main screen by pressing a specific button. After a moment, he found the main screen and decided to touch the Manage Club option, thinking he would check the statistics first. As he briefly scanned his profile, he noticed a section labeled Checkpoint, which seemed to contain a life of various items. He guessed that checkpoints worked similarly to save points in a game. While he didn't understand everything yet, he figured he would figure it out after experiencing it a few more times and wondered what other settings were available. Meanwhile, outside, his father was becoming increasingly frantic, his impatience palpable. Joon spotted the group option and thought it sounded interesting, realizing it actually functioned like a game. He wondered if raising the brightness would help him see things better. However, when he increased the brightness, the screen turned completely white, proving to be useless. He quickly adjusted it back to its original setting, noting that at least the audio option might be useful. As he turned up the volume, he heard his mother shouting at him, informing him that his father was about to faint from waiting and urging him to come out quickly. She reminded him that the bathroom in the master bedroom was still under repair. He lowered the volume and then rushed to open the gate. His father suddenly barged in, and as Joon stepped outside, he realized that lowering the volume had rendered everything silent, which was surprisingly useful. As for the final control option, he mused that it was completely out of his hands. Wondering why it wouldn't allow him to control his limbs, he used all his strength to free himself and then collapsed onto his bed, muttering that it was all too hard. Checking the time, he noticed it was already midnight and decided to go to sleep, thinking he could ponder everything later, as he was utterly exhausted. The next morning, he arrived at school but was still half asleep, racking his brain for answers. He felt like the key to understanding the ghost stories lay within them, especially regarding the laughing woman. He pondered who might have information about her. Just then, he spotted Suna rushing toward him, exclaiming that she finally made it on time. He noted how she was sprinting, even though her house was right next to the school. The homeroom teacher came by, greeting everyone. Since it was their first day, he asked them to take their seats. He then showed a box to Suna, asking her to pick a seat. After she selected one, Joon also chose a seat and received number 26. As he walked to his seat, he wished for his bench partner to be a cute girl. However, he found himself sitting next to Dukun, a chubby boy he had seen the other day. Joon extended his hand in greeting and said to let's get along. As he sat with Dukun, Joon quickly realized that, aside from Dukun's creepy laughter, he secretly ate chocolates and watched anime during every break. Still, Joon felt it was important to gather information. He turned to Dukun and asked if he remembered anything about the printout from the previous day. Dukun didn't respond, and Joon thought it would be challenging to deal with him, as he was a different kind of Dukun compared to Gyan. Joon then asked if Dukun recalled what was written on that note. Dukun inquired whether Joon was willing to discuss the laughing woman. Joon wondered if Dukun could talk less like a nerd, but he agreed and asked if Dukun remembered that incident. Dukun smiled and said that when they see the laughing woman, they must never act as if they can see Aruyo. Joon wondered how he could pretend he didn't see her. Dukun replied that it was a matter of survival, leaving Joon confused about its meaning. He then asked if there was anything else Dukun remembered. Dukun responded with senzen, and Joon thought that otakus were difficult to understand. He couldn't make sense of anything Dukun was saying. Apologizing, Joon told him to enjoy his anime. Turning towards Suna, Joon remarked that he noticed she was almost late that day. She replied that her grandma had woken her up late. He then asked if she had greeted her bench partner, thinking he should talk to her as well. Joon extended his hand toward the girl sitting next to Suna and introduced himself. She stared at his hand, and he wondered why she was just looking at him, questioning if he had made a mistake. She smirked and, shaking his hand, said her name was Hyeon and that they should get along well. Joon thought there weren't any ghost stories about a beautiful girl with a smiling face. He thought that Hyeon's voice was sweeter compared to Suna's, but he decided to focus on the conversation. He asked Hyeon if she remembered the printout they received the previous day. She nodded and asked for the reason behind his question. He replied that he heard there was something concerning in it, and inquired if she recalled anything specific. She mentioned that if they encountered a strange laughing woman at school, they should pretend not to see her and walk past her as if everything was normal. She added that it could be pretty scary. Agreeing with her, he noticed that Suna looked sad, so he asked if she would like to go to the store together during the break. Suna's face lit up as she exclaimed that it sounded fun. When they arrived at the store during their break, they both reminisced about Jian, and Joon mentioned that she probably would be mad that they went without him. Suna replied that he might be. Joon thought about it, recalling that Guyan seemed like a spoiled rich kid, so he doubted he would be eating anything trashy anyway. As they entered the store, it was total chaos. Joon thought he didn't want to leave empty-handed, so he grabbed Suna's hand to navigate through the mess. He commented that the place was really hectic. However, he quickly realized that she might not feel comfortable with him holding her hand. Unsure of what to say next, they suddenly heard a woman approaching with a bizarre smile, prompting Joon to wonder what was wrong with her. A boy asked what her problem was, while another girl told her to stop blocking the path and get out of the way. The woman's smile was unsettling, and all the students froze in place as one boy remarked on how tall she was. Joon turned to Suna and asked what they should do, realizing that this might be the laughing woman they had been warned about. She looked frightened and suggested they stay where they were, and he agreed. As others murmured about the woman's sanity, they hurried to move away. Suddenly, the lady lunged forward and decapitated a boy with the knife in her hand, sending shockwaves of fear through the crowd. Joon couldn't believe they were expected to remain still with such a threat nearby. He grabbed Suna's hand and urged her to run. "Let's get out through the window," he shouted. Suna pleaded with him to look behind himself, terrified to see the woman coming closer. In an instant, she struck, and Joon's heart sank as he realized he would have to start over from the last checkpoint. As he returned, frustration washed over him as he wondered if it was the entrance ceremony day again, which felt oddly different. Just then, he saw Suna running into the classroom. Joon quickly checked the date on his phone. The teacher entered the class, greeting everyone and asking them to choose their seats since it was their first day. The teacher prompted Suna to pick one. Joon realized he had returned to the same morning and questioned what the criteria were for this strange occurrence. The teacher encouraged all the students to come up and choose their seats. When Joon selected a seat, he found it was the same one as before. As he approached, he noticed Dukun sitting there and thought that his understanding of Dukun had increased before he had died. He wondered if the status screen had reset as well. It was a relief to realize that his understanding remained the same as before. He decided he should ask about the printouts first, so he greeted Dukun, who returned the greeting warmly. Joon then asked if Dukun remembered the printout they had received during the entrance ceremony, which was immediately taken back. Dukun confirmed that he did. Joon then mentioned that there was something written on that note, asking if Dohun knew what it was. Dukun inquired if he was referring to the laughing woman. Joon confirmed and asked if Dukun remembered the details. Dukun explained that if they came across the laughing woman, they had to act like they didn't see her. Joon asked if that meant they had to pretend not to notice her at all, thinking they couldn't even show a hint of recognition. Dukun replied that it's dame. He then asked Joon what dame and zen meant, and whether they were Japanese. Dukun clarified that it meant they couldn't and not at all. Joon thanked him for the clarification. As he left, he thought the conversation hadn't been so bad. Dukun, on the other hand, thought it was amusing that Joon didn't even know the meanings of dame and zen, yet he still considered himself Matamata. Joon walked over to Suna's nearby desk and noticed she seemed worried. He recalled their earlier panic, remembering how they had run for their lives just a while ago, and felt relieved to see her again. He reached out, telling her he noticed she was late today. She replied that it was because her grandmother hadn't woken her up early. Then he asked if she had greeted her deskmate. She denied him, and then he moved his hand toward her, introducing himself. She simply stared at him, and he thought she was just as pretty as before. Then, Hyeon shook hands with him, introducing herself as well. Joon asked if she remembered the printout they had taken on their last date. She agreed and asked if there was any reason for his inquiry. He replied that he had heard there was a strange warning on it, so he wanted to know if she remembered it. She mentioned that there was indeed a peculiar laughing woman within the school, and they pretended not to see her, walking past her normally, which was pretty scary. He agreed with that and thought that usually he would have gone to the store with Suna, but he decided to drop that plan. He then asked Suna if that was really scary. She replied that it was strange. As Joon walked down the corridor, he wondered where the lady had come from. Just as he looked outside the window, he saw that the lady had climbed into the schoolyard. Joon thought to himself that was why she had suddenly appeared, despite the crowd of people. Just then, Jian approached Joon from behind, saying hello, and noting that this was their first meeting since the last day. Joon turned to see who it was and realized it was Jian. Jian asked if something was happening outside. Joon thought that now that she mentioned it, Jian could tell him about ghost stories and he might know something. As Joon was about to say something to Jian, they heard a boy asking the lady what was going on and telling her to stop blocking the road and get out of the way. Joon thought the lady was about to move soon. He then told Guyan that even though what he was about to say might sound strange, he wanted to know how the main character in ghost stories survives. As Guyan pondered this, Joon urged him to hurry and share whatever came to his mind. Jian replied that he thought he had already told Joon that there wasn't a particular main character, and there was no winning condition. He then asked if Joon still didn't understand, explaining that it was just a concept. Joon replied that he understood but wanted to know how the people who encountered the ghosts managed to survive. As Joon pressed Jian for an answer, Jian suggested that Joon might be able to just follow the manual since it was generally structured like a warning or caution. Just then, they heard the boy asking the lady what was going on with her, and if she wasn't going to move. Jian asked if Joon was implying that the woman would turn into the laughing woman or something equally strange, labeling her as just a crazy woman. Suddenly, the woman turned and threw a knife at Jian. Even though Joon was terrified, he tried to compose himself. The woman smiled in a disturbingly peculiar way. The other students were shocked, wondering what had just happened, and some considered calling the teacher. Joon rushed to leave the scene, thinking that the manual advised ignoring her, but he found it crazy that he could even contemplate doing something like that. He felt the urge to run away. As he was sprinting, he spotted Suna in a classroom and quickly grabbed her hand, asking her to go outside for a walk with him. She replied that the break would soon be over. Joon responded that while he was in the hall, he had heard the break was extended by 20 minutes, so he insisted they walk together. Suna eventually agreed and got up to leave the classroom with him. As they walked, she heard a boy scream. Looking out the window, she saw the lady attacking a boy. Suna urged Joon to look. He replied that they should hurry. They agreed, and as they were exiting the school building, a pickup truck drove in. They quickly hid, noticing that the gate was open and the security was busy talking to the person who had arrived in the truck. They realized it was their chance to escape. A loud scream pierced the air, and Suna urged Joon to look where she was pointing. There, the lady was attacking the students with a strange slime, instilling fear in everyone around her. As she continued her assault, a boy glanced out of the window, pleading for someone to save them. The pickup driver wondered what was happening. Another boy clung to a pole, crying out for his mother. The lady passed by him, laughing unnervingly, causing him to slip from the pole and fall. Joon and Suna were equally shocked by the scene. Joon told Suna that it seemed a strange person had entered the school wielding a deadly weapon, and since it was dangerous they should stay outside until everything settled down. They needed to sneak out through the front door without being noticed by the security guard, so they crouched down and quietly followed. She agreed, and together they slowly made their way out of the school area. Just then they heard more screams and wondered if the lady had already escaped. As Joon turned to look, he saw the lady leap toward him, successfully severing his head. He died and would now restart from the checkpoint where he had been sitting in class when Suna rushed in. Anger surged through him at having returned to this moment. He pondered how he was supposed to pretend he hadn't seen her, and wished she would at least try to look less terrifying. But that wasn't the case, and he realized he had to navigate this situation, even if it was daunting. If he ignored her, the same terrifying events would simply repeat. Unfortunately, the school store was too crowded, and she was likely to provoke a scene quickly. With no other options, he knew he had to leave her to face the threat alone and attempt to follow the manual. The homeroom teacher instructed the students to choose their seats. When Joon selected his, he found himself in the 26th seat again, right next to Dukon. He thought it was the third time in a row and wondered if it was just a coincidence. Normally, this would be the moment he would go over to greet Suna, but pretending not to see that ghostly girl was even more concerning. The teacher urged everyone to sit in the seats they had drawn. Joon pondered why he was the only one who had to confront that woman. He wished for break time to be delayed, fearing the bell would ring too soon. However, when the bell finally rang, the teacher announced that they would continue the lecture the next day. Joon trembled with fear. It was truly terrifying. Yet he didn't want to run away and relive the past 2 years all over again. He needed to face this moment. As he rushed out of class, Suna approached him and asked if he wanted to go to the store together. She added that if he felt annoyed, she would go alone. June wondered what it was on, if she had his back, and ultimately agreed to accompany her. Her face lit up with happiness as they both headed toward the store. June questioned his decision. He was taking her to a dangerous place. However, going alone felt even scarier. As he thought about her, he realized she could act as his lookout. He devised a plan. While she kept watch, he would leap over the wall to confront the woman. Following the manual, he would ignore her, and everything would be handled.